support journalism. Welcome to Global Journalist. I'm David Reed. Hundreds of Iranian men took to the streets of Tehran on Wednesday to demonstrate their anger over Iran's collapsing currency and the deteriorating economic conditions. The chanting protesters marched to a major market area where riot police had attacked suspected black market currency traders. The Iranian currency has lost more than one-third of its value since last week. Iran's government is blaming the plunging rial on currency traders and pressures from Western enemies. The U.S. State Department says the rial's decline is the result of international sanctions imposed over Tehran's disputed nuclear program. At the same time, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu proposed even tougher sanctions as a tactic this week, and the right-wing leader seemed to be de-emphasizing the military option. Joining our program today to talk about these developments are two journalists who've written extensively about Iran's nuclear threat and the possibility of a preemptive attack on the Islamic Republic's nuclear facilities. Jay Bushinsky has been reporting from Israel for more than 40 years and is the editor of Media Group International. He's calling in from a suburb of Tel Aviv. Matt Gurney is a columnist and editor at Canada's National Post. Jay and Matt, welcome to Global Journalist.
Thank you very much.
Let's start from the view inside Israel. Jay, what are the experts saying about the implications of this unusual display of public anger in Iran?
Well, they see it as a clear indication that the sanctions are having an effect and that public opinion in Iran is turning against the regime. But none of the commentators or analysts here are saying that this is a prelude to an overthrow of the incumbent government of the Islamic extremists, including President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
Okay. And Matt, you're a student of military history. Do you think the military option is on the back burner now that the sanctions appear to be working?
I wouldn't say it's any more on the back burner now than it has been for the last several years. I mean, obviously there are factions within the Israeli government and also within the U.S. defense community who certainly believe that the military option is the better one. And in either country, at this point, they are the prevailing view. Will this change that? Well, I mean, certainly maybe some people who are kind of in the middle ground might be convinced by this. But I think we need to keep in mind, if you are one of the hawks, so to speak, in the U.S. Israeli defense community, you're going to look at these protests and you're going to say, well, you know what? We've seen this before. We've seen the Green Revolution get crushed in 2009. We know this is a regime that is both willing and able to clamp down on popular dissent without wavering from its nuclear plans. So I'm not sure these new protests are really going to change the calculus on either side of the debate in Washington or Tel Aviv.
Right. I noticed that today the reports from Iran are that the riot police deployed out at the key intersections and appear to have stopped a second day of protest marches. And so, Jay, would you agree that this may not be a serious situation in Iran, or do you think that it's a sign that it is the regime is weakening?
I think it is a sign that the regime is weakening, and I don't think that the demonstrations can be cut short within the space of 24 to 48 hours. Having covered the Iranian Revolution in Tehran until the arrival of the late Ayatollah Khomeini, I would expect that there will be more demonstrations and maybe bigger ones as we proceed. Of course, where that will lead, whether it will lead to the overthrow of the regime, is another question. I wouldn't bet on it.
And so let's get back to this military option. Gareth Porter, an investigative journalist specializing in U.S. security policy, wrote in a column today that the world can stop worrying about Netanyahu's, quote, supposed threat to bomb Iran. Porter said Netanyahu's speech at the United Nations Security Council last week appears to mark the end of Netanyahu's long campaign to convince the world that Israel might launch a unilateral nuclear strike on Iran's nuclear program. And journalist Jeffrey Goldberg called it a concession speech, saying that in effect Netanyahu's effort to force the U.S. to accept his red line had failed. And he's the journalist who Netanyahu had twice used to convey to the U.S. his readiness to go to war with Iran. Jay, how do you react to those two arguments?
Well, I think that they're overdoing it because This is not a theoretical problem or a political issue. This is an existential issue for Israel. And the fear here is that a nuclear Iran would be an existential threat to the very existence of Israel, mainly because the leaders of Iran have said repeatedly that Israel has no right to exist, and that sooner or later, and sooner preferably than later, it'll be wiped off the map. So Israel can't live with a nuclear Iran, and if the international community doesn't solve the problem, either through sanctions or through a joint military operation, then, of course, Israel will do what it can to prevent Iran from going nuclear. The speeches are tactical, but they do not necessarily reflect the decisions taken in Jerusalem.
Matt, what are your reactions to those pretty strong statements by those fellow journalists?
Well, I certainly think at the very least that there has been some element of now delay. It would be very difficult for Mr. Netanyahu to travel to New York and say that next summer is our drop-dead red line. I mean, that's the end of the road, and then do anything before that summer. And certainly I think if he said that the summer is when the red line is, don't go and bomb them in the winter. But I think I entirely agree with Jay. I mean, I don't think North American audiences always understand how this is perceived in Israel. The last time I was in Israel, the guest of one of my oldest friends, the military officer who grew up in Canada, he's very culturally North American, but he was to say what people don't understand in North America is that in Israel, people accept as a fact that Iran wants to destroy us. So I don't think we should read too much of North American perspective into how the Israeli government will react. As Jay says, if this is an existential threat, and if Israel feels it's backed into a corner, they will strike.
Okay. One aspect that seems to be underreported is the civilian deaths that would be caused by bombing Iran's nuclear plants, particularly the uranium conversion facility near Isfahan, a city of 2 million people. The University of Utah's Hinckley Institute of Politics and the NGO OMID for Iran teamed up to produce a study that concludes that a military strike on the facility would have tragic consequences. As many as 70,000 people could be killed or injured after being exposed to toxic plumes released as the result of such strikes. And such a scenario would mean that the people of Isfahan could experience a catastrophe similar to the gas leak in Bhopal or the nuclear meltdown in Chernobyl. The title of the report is "The Ayatollah's Nuclear Gamble." Matt, do you think the issue of collateral damage has been adequately represented in media reports on the military option?
No, I don't really think it has. But I think it's difficult to really know how we even should portray it because we don't know what the nature of the attack would be. We don't know if it would be a very limited strike with bunker-busting bombs. We don't know if it was a general air campaign. We don't even know if the attack was limited to conventional weapons, even though I tend to assume it would be. But I think in terms of the collateral damage aspect, I've never really been an alarmist on radiation effects. I think if we look at what happened in Japan after the tsunami, it's possible to evacuate civilian populations from the path of radioactive plumes. Not easy. I'm not downplaying it, but it's certainly possible. And I think, given the stakes of it, as I've said, Israel would consider this an existential issue. So 70,000 Iranian casualties probably wouldn't be a deal breaker for them. When it comes to the United States, they would be a little more leery, but they also have military and technical capacity to probably have a much more measured strike and hopefully mitigate a lot of those casualties.
Right. And Jay, you've written about counterattacks that could kill many Israeli citizens. Can you talk about that aspect?
Yes, I think that that's a little harder to understand because if the Israeli Air Force is used to bomb these installations, there certainly will be a retaliation against Israel. But even if the American Air Force leads the way, even if the Israeli Air Force is kept out of this entire affair, as it was kept out of the Gulf War, there still could be a retaliation against Israel. And therefore, one has to stop and think, how could they retaliate? After all, they're a long distance from here, the Iranians. And the answer to that is this. They have allies close by. The main ally is Hezbollah, the Lebanese Islamic fundamentalist militia in southern Lebanon, and they have received over the past few years a total of more than 70,000, that's 70, 70,000 surface-to-surface missiles. And then there's the Hamas-Palestinian regime in the Gaza Strip. If Iran is hit, the orders could go from Tehran to southern Lebanon and to Gaza to unleash those missiles. They did it before. The last time there was a Lebanon-Israeli war, missiles came in from Lebanon. And this time, more missiles would come in, and the casualty toll in Israel would probably be much higher than the 500 that Defense Minister Barak estimated a few days ago.
And what does the Israeli population think about that possibility, and what are their thoughts about the military strike option?
Mixed reaction. There are people who have responded to the public advertisements put in by the officials here to collect the gas masks and make sure you know how to put them on. And there are other people simply are kind of fatalistic about it and have not responded and are not getting their air raid shelters ready for this kind of a situation. There is no uniform reaction here, neither in word nor in deed.
But Netanyahu's popularity has gone significantly down, like 23% now.
That's right. His popularity has gone down to as low as 22%, but not because of this issue, more because of economic problems within Israel, such as the rising prices of foodstuffs and other costs that the Israeli public has to face.
And is there a possibility for that there could be early elections and there could be a change in power?
Yes, absolutely. That's the big story because the situation is as follows. Within the next 2 weeks, Mr. Netanyahu wants an agreement from his coalition government on the new budget for next year, the national budget. But he's having trouble getting unanimity on that issue. And if he cannot get that unanimity, he will call a national election in mid-February instead of later as late as September of next year, which he could under other circumstances. So right now, that's what's keeping the public here in suspense. Will there be a national election in mid-February, or will a deal be closed and thereby the election will be put off until next year from now, nearly a year? That's the way it works.
And who might be under that possible scenario? Who might be replacing him if that happens?
I'm afraid to say, but Netanyahu will probably be reelected, will probably form the next government because his rivals do not have the impact that he has on Israeli public opinion.
What about Defense Minister Barak?
Never. Not at this stage. There's a rift between Barak and Netanyahu, and Barak will be lucky if he gets back into the government in the upcoming or next coalition. Okay,
and I wanted to switch gears a bit and talk about this another development in the Middle East. Turkey's vote in Parliament today to authorize military force inside Syria after the two countries exchanged military strikes. But before we continue our discussion, I want to remind everyone that you can view or listen to this program anytime by downloading our video podcasts at globaljournalist.org. You can also find interesting articles, photos, and interviews related to today's program on our website. Please send us questions or comments via globaljournalist@kbia.org or our Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter under a new handle at globaljourn, global JOURN. So, Jay, what do you make of the what's happening now in between Turkey and Syria?
I tend to agree with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton that the situation along the Syrian-Turkish border is very dangerous at the international level, and that that conflict between Turkey and Syria could not only destabilize the Middle East, but also expand into a regional conflict because of the different interests of the different countries in this part of the world. It could spill over into the neighboring states. It could hit Lebanon. It could hit Israel. It could affect Jordan, to say the least, not to mention Iraq. So it's a dicey situation because of the influx of, I don't know, is it more than 100,000 refugees from Syria to Turkey, and the fact that there's been some irresponsible behavior by armed elements of the Syrian army in firing into Turkish territory and causing casualties there.
Okay, and Matt, we're having a bit of a bad connection, but I'll see if you're coming in clear. What do you think of what's happening in these between Turkey and Syria, and what that might mean?
Well, it's certainly dangerous. I don't think there's any way to get around that. I think on the international and regional perspective, we can't forget that Turkey is a member of NATO as well, and I mean that could certainly complicate the situation. I actually wouldn't expect there to be a problem with Israel in that situation. I think Syria would have its hands full, but I think we need to remember that if there is actual state-to-state fighting between Turkey and Syria, it is exactly that kind of scenario that the Turkish military leadership, the Syrian military leadership, had pointed to and said, this is when we would use our chemical weapons. They said we wouldn't use them internally, but if there's any external forces coming out trying to intervene in this civil war, we might go chemical. And that's something that we can't ignore because as this regime destabilizes, I think as we know, desperate regimes aren't always predictable or stable ones or even rational ones. So this is very serious. I hope Turkey handles this responsibly and has a measure of response. But as Jay has said, Syrian military forces are acting aggressively. We have had Turkish planes shot down. We have had shots fired into Turkish territory. Turkey's a sovereign state. They can't ignore that.
Right. And Jay, let's talk a bit about Iran in regards to this. Iran has been, by some reports, spent $1 billion supporting the Syrian regime. And some of the protesters yesterday were chanting that get out of Syria, we have enough problems in Iran to deal with. So how do you think that Iran is affected by these latest dynamics?
Well, I would say that it's how Iran is affecting this crisis because it's not just how the crisis is affecting Iran and that the public opinion there would like to see Iran stay out of it, but that the Iranian government sees Syria as a valuable strategical asset with the backing of China and Russia, apparently, and they don't want to see this regime go because they have no way of knowing what kind of a regime will come in its wake and whether the new regime will be as pro-Iranian and pro-Russian, etc., as the incumbent one. So that's the big problem. Even for Israel and Turkey and so on, to use force against or to come in on the side of the rebels would threaten Iran's grip on Syria, and that's a major strategic asset for Iran because it extends Iranian influence with the ideology behind it all the way into the western part of the Middle East, up to the Lebanese border and beyond into southern Lebanon. So therefore, the rebels are having a hard time because no international factor is coming to their aid in terms of military activity, only to a certain extent humanitarian aid.
Matt, do you see the possibility of if Turkey gets more involved, there to be some Western intervention in Syria? Could this be the beginning of that scenario?
I would hope not. I'm not convinced that Turkey would need our help, frankly. The Turkish military is advanced, high-tech, well-trained. I mean, they do have the ability to protect their borders. Syria's military forces are stretched to the max already. So I think if it actually does come down to a shooting war, Turkey would do okay. I think the issue more so would be if Turkey does request formal NATO intervention, and they've already asked for an emergency meeting of the North Atlantic Council, there will be one. I could easily see some NATO logistical support, early warning aircraft, transfers of munitions, things like that. I mean, something to show that NATO is behind their allies, but do I actually see British, Canadian, or U.S. troops going into Syria alongside the Turks? No, I don't. I think it's not necessary, and I think there's not enough appetite in the West to get into this. If there was, we'd probably be in it already.
Now, Jay, you've covered numerous wars and skirmishes in the Middle East. What do you think the chances are that this could lead to some Western intervention? And in general, what are your thoughts about the chances of that happening?
Well, I agree 100% with Matt in his analysis. I think that Syria is a big problem for the Western alliance, for NATO, for the United States, because it's a country which serves a purpose, but not an American purpose, and not a Western purpose. It's an asset to Iran that Iran, under no circumstances, wants to lose, and for which Iran will do almost anything to keep. And we've had reports of Revolutionary Guards joining the Syrian armed forces against the Syrian rebels, and other signs that it's not just verbal support, it's tactical support as well. Iran also has a major Soviet, it's not no longer Soviet, a major Russian installation in the port of Tartus, I believe it is, and the Russians wanted to stay that way. They would not want to see Syria changing sides, so to speak, and lining up with Saudi Arabia and Jordan and all the pro-Western Arab countries. Syria is the only asset they've got left in the Middle East, and they want to keep it.
So, what do you think that the economic problems in Iran are going to play a big role in how they?
We talked about that at the beginning. They could. I mean, I saw the Iranian demonstrations against the Shah back in 1978 into 1979. I saw how the Iranians can turn out into the streets and march for the political goal that they may have, and they may have just started doing it again. But I would not predict that these demonstrations about the value of the Iranian rial, the national currency, or the effect that the crisis, the sanctions have been having on the Iranian economy will lead to a showdown with the regime and to the regime's overthrow. I wouldn't bet on that.
Okay. Let's change gears a little bit and talk about another internal dynamic in Iran, and that is Iran's efforts to shut down, kind of police the internet more strongly. A lot of the information that's coming out of Iran from dissidents and people opposed to the regime is happening through the internet, and they shut down Gmail and they shut down YouTube. And I wanted to kind of get your feeling on the role of the internet in getting information out of Iran and how this might affect that. Jay?
Well, back in 1978-79, during the Iranian Revolution, there hardly was much in the way of computer communications and Twitter and all that. So, and yet the revolution succeeded. I don't think that that the let's say the collapse of the current communications grid, but because of government action and closing down all of those channels, would necessarily have a permanent political effect. It's all up to the feelings of the Iranian people en masse. If they come to the conclusion that their life under the Ayatollahs has become unbearable, unpleasant, and negative in terms of the progress of the country, they could turn against it and they could overthrow it. But it may be too soon for anybody to even broach that possibility.
And Matt, what are your thoughts on what's happening with the social media in Iran?
I certainly understand why the regime would want to cut off that flow of information. Obviously, the West gets information out of Iran, and there's certainly the ability for the Iranian dissidents or even people who might become dissidents to educate themselves using more Western media sources. But the Iranian plan has essentially been to create an internal internet that would be limited to Iran itself. I mean, it's been called the halal internet, so to speak. And you know what? In terms of these possible dissidents or people who are frustrated with economic privation or the collapse of the currency, an internal internet means they can still communicate with each other. And that really is the bigger threat to the Iranian regime. Not what we're saying about them over here in the comfort of North America, but what the Iranians are saying to each other from their homes, and I'm not sure that an internal internet would solve that problem.
And what's I guess let's close on one idea to kind of bring us back to the beginning of the show. The Atlantic magazine has a feature. They call it the Iran War Clock, and they have a percentage of what the chances are that there could be a military conflict involving the West and Iran. And it got up as high as 50%, and particularly during the talk about having red lines and doing a preemptive strike in a matter of within a year's time. And I wanted to see if you guys can give me your gut instinct estimate about that percentage of chance of military conflict with Iran. Matt, what would your percentage be?
I would say actually probably about 50%, but I think that can go up or down quite a bit depending what happens in the U.S. in November, and as Jay was saying earlier, what happens with Israeli domestic politics.
Okay.
I think the Iranian regime is going to get more and more desperate. I think they're really going to...
Okay, I got to cut you off, Matt, and Jay, give you your quick percentage.
I agree with Matt. I think his calculation is pretty correct.
Okay, well, we've come to the end of this week's edition of Global Journalist, produced by the Reynolds Journalism Institute and the Missouri School of Journalism. Joining us today were foreign correspondents Jay Bushinsky and Matt Gurney. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Ron.
Welcome.
Global Journalist is directed by Travis McMillan, audio by Pat Akers. Raymond Tungakar is our executive producer. Donovan Ferguson was our lead producer. Now stay with us for Free Press Watch and join us again next week for another Global Journalist. I'm David Reed.
And now Free Press Watch, a segment on Global Journalist where each week we bring to you a rundown of major events affecting press freedom around the world. I'm Stravani Pere. This week's news comes from Committee to Protect Journalists, Reuters, and New York Times. 2 Somali journalists have been killed in the capital of Mogadishu, one of which was a brutal targeted attack. 10 journalists have been killed in Somalia this year in direct relation to their work, with 4 deaths in the last 1 week. Several journalists have decided to suspend their work temporarily because of the recent attacks. Cambodian authorities sentenced journalist Mam Sonando to 20 years imprisonment and a fine of 10 million riel, US dollars 2,500, after convicting him on charges of inciting rebellion. Earlier in September, another Cambodian journalist, Hang Serai Odom, was found dead in an abandoned vehicle. Odom had implicated the son of a military commander in the smuggling of illegal timber in military vehicles, making Cambodia increasingly unsafe for journalists. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, unidentified assailants shot to death a prominent journalist in the city of Kuzdar in Balochistan province. Abdul Haq Baloch was the Secretary General of the Kuzdar Press Club and a long-time correspondent of ARY television. For more information on these and other events affecting press freedom around the world, please visit our website at globaljournalist.org. Thank you for joining us this week on Global Journalist. I am Stravani Pere. See you next week.